Germany is bankrupt. The currency has collapsed. Millions are unemployed. The world sees a defeated nation with no money, no military, and no future. Yet, just 6 years later, that same ruined country unleashes one of the largest armies Europe have ever seen. Tanks, aircraft, artillery, U-boats, millions of soldiers, all built by a nation that could barely afford bread. How does a country go from total economic destruction to building a war machine powerful enough to set half the world on fire? The answer is darker, stranger, and more deceptive than most people realize. Because Germany didn't rise from the ashes with strength. It rose with a financial illusion, a secret system, and a hidden scheme so large that even today, most people have never heard of it. Before we break open the truth behind this hidden economic engine, tell me in the comments where you're watching. And if you're someone who wants to understand the real forces that shaped World War II, hit subscribe so you never miss the stories that reveal how the world actually worked behind the front lines. Now, let's go back to the moment Germany seemed completely finished. Because to understand how Hitler built his war machine, we first have to understand the desperation that made such a scheme possible. Germany, in the early 1930s, is not just struggling, it is shattered to its core. The memories of 1923's hyperinflation still haunt every family. People watched their life savings turn worthless in a single afternoon. A worker could be paid at noon only to discover those wages would barely buy a loaf of bread by evening. Mothers burned stacks of banknotes for heat because firewood cost more than money itself. And just when the nation slowly began recovering, the Great Depression crushes Germany again, harder than before. Factories fall silent. Banks fold one after another. Entire cities grind to a halt as unemployment rises to 6 million. Skilled engineers stand in food lines. K-teachers beg for day labor work. Families place their furniture in the streets to be auctioned for enough coins to survive one more week. Political violence becomes routine. Communist and Nazi groups clash openly, turning neighborhoods into battlegrounds. Democracy fractures under the weight of anger, fear, and hunger. This is the Germany Hitler steps into when he becomes chancellor. In 1933, a Germany with no money, no unity, and no ability to rearm. Yet Hitler promises instant revival. He vows to restore German greatness, rebuild the military, and defy the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. But under the surface, there is a brutal truth. Germany cannot afford even the beginnings of a modern army. The treaty limits them to 100,000 soldiers, no tanks, no aircraft, no submarines, and no heavy weapons. Even if Germany wanted to break those rules, they simply don't have the cash. The economy is too wounded, too empty, too fragile. To achieve his vision, Hitler needs a financial miracle. And that miracle arrives in the form of one man, Yalmar Schacht, a brilliant economist who once saved Germany from disaster and is now ready to try again, but this time with far higher stakes. Yalmar Schacht steps into Hitler's collapsing economic world with calm precision. He is not a man who shouts or threatens. He is a financial surgeon who believes every crisis has a lever hidden inside a tiff. You can find the lever. You can move the entire nation. Schacht had already proved this once, in 1923, when hyperinflation shredded the German mark into dust. He created a new currency backed by land and restored stability almost overnight. Germans saw him as the man who pulled the country back from economic death. Now, in 1934, Hitler needs him to perform an even greater miracle fund, a massive, illegal military buildup without using money Germany doesn't have, without triggering inflation, and without letting foreign governments notice a thing. That last part is crucial. If Britain, France, or the United States saw Germany suddenly spending billions on aircraft, tanks, artillery, and U-boats, they would intervene long before Hitler was prepared for war. Rearmament must stay invisible. Records must stay clean. The world must believe Germany is still too poor to be dangerous. This is the challenge Schacht embraces. Create money with no money. Pay companies without paying them. Build a military without leaving fingerprints. And for that, he designs one of the most audacious financial illusions ever attempted. He creates a company, not a military organization, not a government department, completely fake private company with a quiet name, a small office, and a simple purpose on paper. Research: Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, better known as MEFO, for major German industries receive small ownership stakes to make it look legitimate. But MEFO has no employees. It conducts no research. It produces nothing, sells nothing, and has no physical facilities. The company exists only on documents, a ghost with a bank account. But this ghost becomes the engine of Hitler's rearmament. Here's how. Schacht transforms a fake company into a financial pipeline. When a German arms manufacturer receives an order for tanks or aircraft, the government does not pay them in real Reichsmarks. Instead, the company receives MEFO bills, promissory notes issued by the fake company. They are essentially IOUs that say MEFO will pay this amount in 5 years. Okay, at first glance, it seems absurd. Okay, why would a massive steel or arms corporation accept a worthless piece of paper from a company that, on paper, barely exists? But Schacht understands psychology, trust, and fear. The companies know MEFO is backed by the Reichsbank. They know the real power behind the signature is the German stick. So they accept the bills, confident the government will honor them when the time comes. But manufacturers cannot wait 5 years to pay their workers or buy more materials. So they go to private banks and exchange MEFO bills for real cash usually at a small discount. The private banks now hold MEFO bills. They, in turn, take these bills to the Reichsbank. And here is Schacht's masterstroke when the Reichsbank converts them into cash. These transactions do not appear on official public accounts. To outside observers, Germany looks stable, quiet, maybe even recovering. Meanwhile, billions flow invisibly into weapons, factories, and training. Between 1934 and 1938, MEFO bills secretly fund 12 billion Reichsmarks of rearmament, more money than Germany's entire national budget only years earlier. But beneath this miracle lies a growing threat. MEFO bills are not magic. They are debt. And every promissory note promises payment in 5 years. The first bills issued in 1934 will come due in 1939. Germany does not have the money to pay them. And the closer the deadline gets, the more Schacht realizes the trap he has created. A trap that will force Hitler toward a terrifying solution. The battlefield steadied for a moment, but no man believed the calm would last. The air still carried the echo of American artillery rolling across the shattered tree line. The smell of cordite hung like a warning that the enemy was regrouping. Somewhere beyond the smoke, soldiers of the U.S. unit, mud-covered, exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline, tightened their grips on their rifles as if instinct told them the fight wasn't done yet. They had pushed farther than expected, hit harder than planned, and survived longer than the Germans ever thought possible. But every man knew one thing. The mission wasn't finished. Not yet. What had just happened was only the opening act. Intelligence runners whispered updates through the ranks. German reinforcements had been spotted moving through the forest. More armor, more infantry, more pressure coming their way. But instead of fear, the news pushed energy through the American line. If more enemy troops were rolling in, it only meant one thing. Their offensive had shaken the Germans so badly that they were forced to commit reserves early. And that was exactly the kind of momentum the U.S. forces needed. The commander moved down the line, his boots splashing through the churned earth. His voice cut through the tension with clarity and purpose. He reminded the men why they were out here, why they had pushed so relentlessly, why they refused to break even when they were outnumbered and outgunned. They weren't simply holding territory, they were stopping a German breakout that could reshape the entire front. Every inch they defended right now mattered. Every moment they stayed standing mattered. Every soldier here, tired or not, had already proven they were capable of holding back the enemy tide. But the rehook, the jolt of purpose, came from what happened next. A radio operator sprinted toward the command post, shouting before he even reached the commander. Reinforcements were coming, American reinforcements. Fresh infantry, more Sherman tanks, and critical artillery batteries were moving to join the fight. The men who had been fighting alone for hours were no longer alone. The sound of distant engines began to rise from the rear, not the threatening roar of German armor, the mechanical heartbeat of American steel arriving with purpose. This was the turning point they needed. The soldiers looked at one another with a spark that had been burnt low but not extinguished. They adjusted helmets, checked ammunition, and watched the smoke for the first shadows of enemy soldiers returning for another assault. If the Germans wanted to break through this line, they would have to walk straight into a reinforced American defense hardened by determination and backed by firepower. And behind every heartbeat of anticipation was a simple truth. The U.S. forces had already survived the worst the enemy had thrown at them. Now they were preparing to strike back with twice the force. The rehook of the battle, the spark that reignites. The story was not a dramatic twist. It was the realization that the Americans were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. Reinforcements were on the way. Morale was rising, and every soldier understood the stakes. What came next would not be a repeat of desperate defense. It would be the moment the U.S. forces seized control of the battlefield. The calm before the storm was over. The storm they were about to unleash was just beginning. The first waves of reinforcements arrived just as the German counterattacks began. American artillery barked across the battlefield, cutting down the enemy with precision. Sherman tanks rolled forward, their engines growling like predators ready to hunt. Infantry squads advanced, covering each other, moving as a single, disciplined unit despite exhaustion, mud, and the chaos of shattered terrain. Every movement was calculated, every shot deliberate. It was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight to regain control, set the tone for the rest of the engagement. The German forces had overextended. They had underestimated the endurance, discipline, and coordination of the U.S. soldiers. On the front line, armor units advanced too quickly, leaving supply lines vulnerable. American troops, using every advantage of the terrain, funneled the Germans into kill zones, artillery barrages, machine gun nests, and coordinated infantry. Strikes shredded their formations. The psychological impact on the enemy was immediate. Panic and confusion spread among the German ranks, their commanders shouting orders that often went unheard as communication lines were cut or destroyed. Meanwhile, the Americans adapted rapidly. Medics moved efficiently between squads, extracting wounded soldiers and ensuring they returned to the fight whenever possible. Communications teams maintained constant contact with supporting units, ensuring reinforcements arrived precisely where they were needed. Every man knew that victory depended not on heroics alone, but on coordination, preparation, and unwavering resolve. By midday, the tide had decisively turned. German forces were forced into retreat, abandoning tanks, weapons, and critical supplies. American soldiers pressed forward methodically, securing key positions and preventing any possibility of a counterattack. The battlefield, once a chaotic struggle, began to take shape under the control of the U.S. Army. Every victory was measured, deliberate, and strategically significant. Ensuring the Germans could not regroup effectively, the resolution of this engagement was not just military, it was psychological. The morale boost for U.S. troops was immense. They realized that with training, coordination, and determination, even well-equipped enemy forces could be overcome, commanders documented. Every decision, every tactical maneuver, using the lessons learned to strengthen future operations. Reports from the field highlighted the resilience of American forces and the efficiency of their logistical support, a stark contrast to the collapsing enemy strategy. By nightfall, the battlefield was firmly in American hands. Casualties had been managed, positions secured, and enemy forces in disarray. The engagement demonstrated the growing dominance of U.S. military power and the effectiveness of combined arms strategy. It also underscored a larger truth. Germany's earlier advances were not invincible. Its preparation, strategy, and relentless determination. The U.S. Army could turn desperate situations into decisive victories, setting the stage for the broader campaign that would ultimately lead to Allied success in Europe. The impact was clear. The Americans had not just survived, they had won, and the enemy was on notice. The lessons of coordination, resilience, and strategy would echo through every subsequent engagement, shaping the path toward ultimate victory. The following morning, the battlefield was alive with anticipation. The Germans, regrouping under the cover of darkness, were determined to reclaim lost ground. They had brought reinforcements, armored vehicles, elite units with a single mission: crush the American line and regain momentum. But this time, the U.S. Army was ready. Intelligence reports had identified enemy weak points, artillery placements, and supply routes. Every American commander knew that hesitation could mean disaster, but action could mean a decisive turning point. As the first light of dawn filtered through smoke and fog, American troops took positions with ruthless efficiency. Infantry squads fanned out, covering every approach. Machine gun nests were set to sweep enemy advances, while artillery crews prepared to unleash precise, coordinated barrages. Sherman tanks rumbled forward, engines echoing across the battlefield like a warning. Every soldier felt the tension, the calm before the storm, but unlike before, this storm would be controlled, calculated, acute, and devastating. The Germans advanced with confidence, expecting to encounter weakened, exhausted opponents. Instead, they ran straight into a wall of coordinated American firepower. Artillery strikes shredded their armor, cutting lanes of advance. Machine guns tore through infantry formations, forcing the enemy into disarray. Every maneuver the Germans attempted was anticipated by American commanders who had studied the terrain and enemy patterns the night before. The battlefield, once chaotic, now belonged to the Americans strategically. Amid the chaos, small unit tactics turned into spectacular displays of courage. Squad leaders coordinated flanking maneuvers, cutting off enemy retreats and forcing surrender. Engineers cleared obstacles while medics extracted the wounded under fire, keeping units operational. Morale high. Air support arrived, strafing enemy positions and creating further confusion in the German ranks. The Americans were no longer reacting. They were dictating the pace of battle. By midday, the German offensive began to crumble. Tanks were abandoned. Infantry scattered, and command cohesion broke down entirely. American units pressed forward, capturing critical objectives and consolidating gains. Every success was measured, deliberate, and methodical. The Americans were not just defending, they were turning the tide, reshaping the battlefield in real time. The climax reached its peak when a decisive push shattered the German command post, severing communication lines and leaving enemy units leaderless. Panic swept through the ranks, orders were ignored. Retreats became routes. American forces advanced with unstoppable momentum, and by evening, the battlefield was completely under U.S. control. This battle, once a desperate test of endurance, had become a demonstration of American military discipline, strategy, and sheer tenacity. Every soldier on the field had played a role in turning potential disaster into decisive victory. The Germans had underestimated the Americans. Now they paid the price in both territory and morale. Victory was no longer a hope, it was inevitable. And this was just the beginning of a campaign that would continue to expose German weaknesses while showcasing the unstoppable efficiency of the U.S. Army. As the sun set over the battered terrain, the Americans held their ground, but there was no time to rest. Across the forest and shattered roads, German forces were regrouping, digging in for another desperate assault. The air was thick with smoke, the stench of mud, and the echoes of distant artillery. Every man on the American side knew the coming. Ours would test their endurance, skill, and courage like never before. This was the moment where strategy and willpower would collide. The battlefield would reveal who had the staying power to dictate the war's next chapter. Commanders called hasty meetings amid the chaos, planning the next move. Intelligence. Reports had already flagged enemy reinforcements, their positions, and likely attack routes. The Americans could not afford to wait passively. Every decision now carried life-or-death consequences. Troops were repositioned, artillery recalibrated, and communication lines reinforced. The soldiers felt the tension in the air, but instead of fear, it was resolve as shared understanding that holding the line now meant shaping the future of the front entirely. Then the first enemy probes appeared at twilight. Small squads attempted to infiltrate reconnoiter positions and test the American defenses. Each move was met with a calculated response. Machine guns erupted, rifle fire, cut across advancing troops, and grenades scattered those who dared advance. American forces used every advantage of the terrain, digging in where possible and forcing the Germans to overextend themselves. The battlefield became a chessboard where every piece was moving deliberately and decisively. As night fell, reinforcements arrived. Fresh infantry companies, additional tanks, and artillery units moved into position under the cover of darkness. Supply lines, once tenuous, were now fortified. The Americans could not afford a misstep, but they also had the momentum I needed. Every soldier understood their role. Every action was synchronized, turning the battlefield from chaos into a controlled offensive posture. The psychological impact on the German forces was immediate. Its confusion, fear, and frustration spread quickly. Communication failures left units isolated. Officers shouted orders that were lost in the fog of war. The Americans, disciplined and coordinated, turned every German mistake into an opportunity to consolidate gains and strengthen their line. Enemy morale collapsed quietly, but decisively as the night wore on. By early morning, the Americans had regained not just lost ground. The Germans were forced back, scrambling to reorganize under continuous fire. Attack. The rehook was clear. The Americans were no longer merely defending. They were dictating the pace, controlling the battlefield, and turning a desperate defensive operation into a prelude for a decisive push. The soldiers, every hour they held, every advance they secured, was a step toward victory. The Germans, once confident in their offensive, now faced the reality of fighting a relentless, strategic, and organized force. The Americans were showing that no matter how strong the enemy appeared, precision, coordination, and determination could change the outcome of a battle. And ultimately, the war with dawn breaking, the battlefield revealed the full extent of American control. German forces were in disarray, their morale shattered by relentless, coordinated attacks. Tanks lay abandoned in the mud, artillery pieces destroyed or captured, and infantry scattered. Defensive positions into launching points for counteroffensives, forcing the enemy into retreat and strategic chaos. The impact of this victory went beyond territory. American soldiers felt a surge of confidence, understanding that meticulous planning, discipline, and combined arms operations could overcome numerically and technically capable enemies. Small unit leadership had been decisive, with squad and platoon leaders taking calculated risks to disrupt German formations. Every maneuver demonstrated the power of coordination over brute force, turning exhaustion into effective action. Supplies and reinforcements arrived steadily, stabilizing the front and allowing American forces to maintain pressure without overextending. Medics and engineers worked tirelessly, extracting wounded and repairing damaged equipment under fire. This operational efficiency not only saved lives, but ensured continuous momentum. Every successful defense and counterattack reinforced the soldiers' belief in the strength of the U.S. Army, while simultaneously weakening German resolve. The broader resolution of this engagement became clear. Germany's tactical misjudgments and over-reliance on fear and intimidation were no match for the Americans' calculated, methodical approach. The enemy's morale collapse spread quickly, creating panic in previously cohesive units. The U.S. forces exploited every gap in German defenses, securing critical positions and preparing for future operations with minimal losses. Beyond the immediate battlefield, its victory sent a strategic message. It demonstrated that German forces, even when heavily armed and determined, could be outmaneuvered and overcome. The Americans had not only survived the enemy's assaults, but had turned their desperation into tactical advantage. Commanders documented the lessons learned. Intelligence, coordination, terrain usage, and morale management were just as vital as firepower. By nightfall, the Americans had solidified their positions, captured key enemy equipment, and forced the Germans into a defensive posture across the front. The battlefield, once chaotic, now reflected the disciplined efficiency of the U.S. military machine. The enemy had been tested, their strategies exposed, and their morale broken. This resolution confirmed a larger truth about the war. When American Forces combined determination, strategic foresight, and operational discipline. Even the most daunting opposition could be dismantled. Victory was not just achieved through courage, it was achieved through planning, coordination, and the relentless application of superior strategy. The stage was now set for the Americans to carry this advantage forward, reshaping the campaign, and setting the tone for further operations across Europe. The aftermath of the battle was both stark and revealing. The Germans had retreated in disarray, leaving behind destroyed equipment, abandoned positions, and scattered forces. Their morale was shattered and their command structure severely weakened. For the U.S. Army, the victory was more than just a tactical win. It was a turning point that demonstrated the growing dominance of American strategy, coordination, and industrial-backed power on the European front. Across the liberated areas, soldiers moved quickly to secure infrastructure and resources. Roads, bridges, and key supply depots were repaired or fortified, ensuring that reinforcements and supplies could flow unimpeded. Medics continued their relentless work, treating wounded soldiers and civilians alike, while engineers cleared mines and debris that could impede movement. Every effort reinforced the operational advantage the Americans had gained and ensured that the abused Germans could not easily regroup or counterattack. The psychological fallout for German troops was profound. Many units, demoralized by the relentless, coordinated American advance, began questioning orders from their commanders. Desertions increased, communications faltered, and command cohesion disintegrated. Officers who once relied on strict discipline now faced troops who had seen firsthand that the Americans were disciplined, relentless, and tactically superior. The battle had proven that no amount of intimidation could substitute for effective strategy. Supply management and morale a lesson that reverberated across every German-controlled sector. For U.S. forces, the victory bolstered confidence and set a new standard for engagement. Leaders at all levels documented the battle meticulously, analyzing successes and failures to refine tactics for upcoming operations. Intelligence gathered from captured enemy documents, radios, and personnel provided invaluable insight into German plans, further tipping the scales in favor of the Americans. Soldiers understood that their perseverance and coordination had not only won the fight, but had also set the foundation for larger strategic campaigns. The broader implications were equally significant. This engagement demonstrated that the Allied forces, particularly the U.S. Army, were capable of turning defensive situations into offensive opportunities. The Germans' reliance on aggression, intimidation, and overextension had backfired, highlighting the vulnerability of even well-armed forces against disciplined, organized opponents. The battlefield had become a proving ground for American tactics that would continue to define the European campaign by the end of the day. The Americans had secured the area, stabilized their lines, and prepared for further advances. German forces were scattered, wounded, and retreating under pressure, leaving a clear path for subsequent operations. The battle's outcome reaffirmed the effectiveness of combined arms strategy, meticulous planning, and relentless execution. The fallout of this victory extended beyond immediate military gains. It reshaped morale, strategy, and the perception of American strength in the eyes of both allies and enemies. German forces, once confident in their superiority, now recognized the formidable capabilities of U.S. troops. Civilians and liberated populations witnessed the resilience and determination of the American Army, setting a precedent for support and cooperation in future operations. The stage was set for continued American advances, and the lessons learned here would inform every major campaign to come, ensuring that the enemy could never underestimate the effectiveness, planning, and yielding spirit of U.S. forces. The battle was over, but its effects rippled far beyond the battlefield. American forces had proven that determination, strategy, and coordination could overcome even the most disciplined enemy. The Germans had been forced into retreat, their morale broken, their plans exposed, and their confidence shattered. What had seemed like an impossible fight had been turned into a decisive victory, showcasing the power of preparation, discipline, and relentless execution. For the U.S. soldiers, the victory was more than just a tactical success, was a testament to their resilience and training, Every decision, every maneuver, every ounce of courage had mattered. This battle had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, strategic planning, teamwork, and unwavering determination could shape the course of the war. This victory would bolster morale across the front, inspiring troops and reinforcing the idea that the American army was a force capable of taking and holding the initiative in Europe. The larger lesson of this engagement was clear. The war was not won by sheer firepower alone, but by discipline, coordination, and the ability to adapt under pressure. The Americans had seized control of the battlefield, dictated the pace of combat, and demonstrated that effective strategy could overcome aggression, numbers, and intimidation. This approach would continue to define their campaigns and ultimately contribute to the defeat of Nazi Germany. As night fell, soldiers surveyed the battlefield, weary but victorious. They had endured, they had adapted, and they had prevailed. The Germans would regroup, but they would never forget the force they had faced. And the Americans, battle-hardened and resolute, would carry the lessons of this fight forward, pushing ever closer toward ultimate victory in Europe. This was the power of preparation, courage, and relentless resolve, the traits that defined the U.S. Army and ensured that, no matter the odds, they could turn the tide of war and change history.